In the days when the Fourth Age was yet young, and the dominion of men spread across the lands once held by elves, there came a darkness upon the silver plains of Rohan. These vast grasslands, which had known peace since the passing of the Rohirrim's greatest kings, trembled beneath an unnatural tempest that came not from the west, but from the forgotten places of the east. Eothaion, son of Erkenbrand, rode hard across the windswept moors, his steeds' hooves drumming against the hardened earth. The storm clouds above churned with malice, and within their depths shapes moved that were not of natural wind or rain. Lightning crashed, but its hue was wrong. Silver white shot through with veins of sickly green. Upon reaching Edoras, he found the Golden Hall in upheaval. King Elfwine, heir to Eomer's throne, paced before the high seat, his brow furrowed with concern. The riders of Rohan spoke in hushed tones of cattle found drained of life, their eyes turned to crystal, and of horses that fled their master's call. "My lord," Eothen spoke, bowing low. "The storm spreads southward. Fangorn stirs, and the Ents speak of a voice in the thunder, a voice that commands the very essence of growing things." Elfwine's hand tightened upon Guthwini, his father's sword. "Then we ride north at dawn. Gather the Eord. This shadow shall not pass into Gondor unopposed." The company that rode from Edoras numbered 50 mounted Rohirrim, their spears bright in the morning sun. Yet as they journeyed toward the heart of the disturbance, the light grew dim, and the grass beneath their horses' hooves began to silver and brittle. At the borders of Fangorn, they were met by Quickbeam, last of the hasty Ents, his bark-like skin scarred by strange burn. Whom, he rumbled, his voice heavy with sorrow. The voice speaks in the old tongue, older than the eldest days. It calls to root and branch, to stone and stream. The trees, they remember what was forgotten. "What does it seek?" asked Elfwine. "Power," came a new voice, clear and melodious. From beneath the eaves stepped Elladan, son of Elrond, his gray cloak travel-stained and his eyes bright with urgency. "I have ridden from Rivendell, following the path of this corruption. It seeks the silver crown." The Rohirrim looked one to another in puzzlement, but Elfwine's face paled. "The crown of stars? But that is legend. A tale told by the minstrels of old Numenor." "No legend," Elladan replied grimly. "It was real, and it was hidden in these lands when Gil-galad fell. If it falls into the wrong hands, the dominion over all growing things in Middle-earth may pass to our enemies." Following Elladan's counsel, the company turned westward, toward the paths of the dead. The Elf Lord spoke of ancient lore, how the silver crown had been wrought by Gil-galad himself, imbued with the power to command the growth and decay of all living things. In the hour of the last alliance's greatest need, it had been hidden away, lest it fall to the enemy. As they entered the shadowed pass, the very stones seemed to whisper. But these were not the voices of oath-breaking dead. Those had long since found their rest. These whispers spoke in the black speech, and Elladan's face darkened as he translated their meaning. "They say, the crown wakes, the crown remembered. Something stirs it from its slumber." Deeper they rode, until they came to a great cleft in the mountain wall that none had seen before. The storm raged above, and from within the cleft came a sound like the groaning of the earth itself. "Here," said Elladan. "The entrance was hidden by Gil-galad's arts, but the storm's power breaks even elven work." They dismounted and ventured into the darkness, torches flickering in the unnatural wind that howled from the depths. Within the mountain's heart lay a vast chamber, its walls carved with the heraldry of ancient Lindon. At its center stood a dais of white stone, and upon it rested a crown of silver set with 7 stars, each star a palantir of smaller make, pulsing with inner light. But they were not alone. Around the crown's resting place stood figures in ancient armor, the Dunedain of old, Gil-galad's chosen guardian, preserved by the crown's power through all the long years. Their eyes opened as the company approached, and their voices spoke in unison. "Who comes seeking the crown of growing things? Who would wake what should sleep until the world's ending?" Eladan stepped forward, his hand upon his sword hilt. I am Eladan Elrondion, and these are the riders of Rohan. We come not to claim, but to protect. The lead guardian, taller than the rest, and bearing the star of Elendil upon his brow, studied them long. The storm above, it is not of your making? Nay, replied Elfwine, we seek to understand its source and turn it aside. But even as he spoke, a great laugh echoed through the chamber, cold and cruel, like the breaking of ice in winter's depth. From the shadows at the chamber's far end stepped a figure that made even Eladan recoil. Tall he was, and fair of face, but his beauty was terrible to behold. His robes were white, shot through with silver, and upon his brow sat a circlet of mithril. In his hand he bore a staff of black wood, and his eyes burned with the light of stars long dead. Pallando, whispered Eladan, and the name fell like a stone into still water. The blue wizard, lost these many centuries in the distant east, smiled coldly. Long have I wandered in the shadow of forgotten kingdoms, learning secrets that were buried with the elder days. The crown of growing thing, it was meant for one such as I, not to lie idle while lesser beings squabble over the remnants of glory. The guardians raised their weapons, but Pallando lifted his staff, and they froze where they stood. Your watch is ended, faithful servants. Sleep now, and trouble the world no more. One by one, the ancient guardians crumbled to dust, their long vigil finally broken. Only their captain remained, struggling against the wizard's power. You cannot have it, he gasped. Can I not? Pallando's voice was soft, almost gentle. I have learned much in the wastes of Rune and the forests of Khand. The Dark Lord is gone, yes, but his knowledge remains, and I have wed it to arts more ancient still. The battle in the chamber was fierce, but brief. Pallando's power had grown beyond measure in his long exile, fed by dark knowledge and bitter ambition. The Rohirrim fought bravely, but their swords could not touch him, and their courage availed little against sorcery. Eladan's blade, wrought in the elder days, blazed with white fire as he dueled the fallen wizard, but even he was overmatched. Pallando seized the silver crown and placed it upon his brow, and at once the very mountain trembled. See how it responds to my will, he cried, and the crown's 7 stars flared with malevolent light. At his command, the stone walls began to sprout thorns of living rock, and creeping vines burst forth to entangle the company. Elfwine cut his way free and charged the wizard, but Pallando gestured dismissively, and the king was hurled back against the wall. Foolish horse lord, you understand nothing of the powers that move in this world. As the crown's influence spread, they felt the very life being drawn from their bodies. The horses above ground screamed and fled, and even in distant Fangorn, the trees began to wither. But in that dark hour, the last guardian stirred. With his final breath, he spoke a single word in Quenya, a word of unbinding that Gil-galad had taught him long ago. The guardian's word of power shattered one of the 7 stars upon the crown, and for a moment, Pallando's concentration wavered. Eladan seized the chance, calling upon the light of Arendil that his father had gifted him, and struck with his blade at the wizard's staff. The black wood cracked, and Pallando screamed in rage and pain. The chamber filled with writhing shadows as his control over the crown faltered, and in that chaos, Elfwine and his riders fought their way to the surface. We cannot defeat him here, Eladan gasped as they emerged into the storm-torn daylight. But we can prevent him from using the crown's full power. If we can reach Isengard. Isengard? Eothen looked confused, but the tower is broken, and the circle flooded. Saruman's libraries remain hidden beneath the waters. There may be knowledge there of how Gil-galad bound the crown's power. It is our only hope. Behind them, the mountain split asunder as Pallando emerged, the crown blazing upon his brow. His voice boomed across the plains. Run, little men! Run to your holes and hovels. When next we meet, I shall have mastered this power, and all Middle-earth shall bow to my will. The wizard rose into the storm, borne up by winds of his own making, and disappeared into the roiling clouds. The ride to Isengard was perilous. The storm followed them, and with it came creatures spawned of Palando's twisted will. Wolves with eyes like burning coal, ravens that spoke in the black speech, and worse things that hunted in the shadows between lightning strikes. At the gates of the ruined Orthanc, they found the circle flooded as Eothen had said, but Elladan studied the waters with elven sight and saw deeper truths. "Here," he said, pointing to a place where the waters swirled in strange pattern. "Saruman's chambers lie beneath, preserved by his arts, using ropes and such diving gear as they could fashion." Elladan and 2 of the hardiest Rohirrim descended into the drowned ruin. In the wizard's study, untouched by water, through some lingering enchantment, they found what they sought: scrolls and books that spoke of the crown's making and the words that could command it. But as they searched, the waters above began to boil. Palando had found them. "Did you think to hide from me in this rat's warren?" His voice echoed through the flooded chamber. "I smell the stench of Saruman's failure here, but also knowledge that might prove useful." The water level began to rise as the wizard's power pressed down upon them. Elladan seized what scrolls he could and signaled frantically to those above to draw them up. In a cavern beneath the misty mountains, the survivors studied the ancient texts by torchlight. The lore was deep and dangerous. Gil-galad had bound the crown not merely with elvish enchantment, but with words from the music of creation itself. Here, Elladan pointed to a passage written in Tengwar so archaic that even he struggled to read it. The crown was made to preserve the balance between growth and decay, creation and entropy. But Palando seeks to bend it to dominion alone. If we can speak the true word, the words Gil-galad used, we might bind its power once more. Elfwine studied the text, though the ancient script was foreign to him. And the price of speaking such words? Elladan's face was grave. The one who speaks them will be bound to the crown as its guardian, unable to leave its presence until another takes their place, or the world's end comes. A heavy silence fell upon the company. Outside, they could hear the storm growing stronger, and in its thunder, Palando's laughter echoed across the land. "I will do it," Elfwine said at last. "I am king of Rohan. If this preserves my people and all the free folk of Middle-earth, then it is a small price." But Eothen stepped forward. "My lord, there may be another way. The texts speak of the crown's creation. But what if we sought not to bind it, but to unmake it entirely?" The idea was desperate, perhaps even mad. To unmake something wrought with the power of the music required understanding not just of creation, but of the discord that Melkor had brought into the world's song. Yet in Saruman's collection, they found references to such workings, dark knowledge that the White Wizard had gathered but never dared to use. As they prepared for what might be their final battle, Palando's storm covered half of Rohan. Reports came from fleeing refugees of trees that walked like men, of the very earth rising up to swallow settlement, of horses turned to crystal statue. The wizard had made his stronghold upon Weathertop, the ancient watchtower of the Dunedain. There, surrounded by swirling clouds and creatures of his own devising, he worked to unlock the crown's remaining 6 stars. "We have perhaps hours before he masters the full power," Elladan warned as they made their plans. "Once all 7 stars burn in perfect harmony, not even the Valor themselves could stand against him." The company that rode to Weathertop numbered but 30, all that remained of Elfwine's riders, plus such men of Bree and the remnants of the Northern Rangers as had answered their desperate call. Against a corrupted wizard of the Astari, it seemed hopeless. But sometimes, Elladan reflected, hope was all that stood between Middle-earth and the darkness. The battle upon the ancient hill was unlike any fought in Middle-earth since the War of the Last Alliance. Palando, crowned with silver fire, commanded the very element. Lightning struck at his bidding. The earth opened to swallow his foes, and the air itself seemed to fight against those who opposed him. Yet the men of the West fought with the courage of those who have nothing left to lose. Elfwine led charge after charge up the hill's slopes, his sword blazing with the light that Andúril once bore. The rangers struck from shadow, their arrows seeking gaps in the wizard's defenses, and Elladan, last son of Elrond, sang the battle songs of Gil-galad as he fought. But for all their valor, they could not reach the summit where Pallando stood. The wizard's power was too great, the crown's influence too strong. It was then that Eothein made his choice. Taking the scroll that contained the words of unmaking, he broke from the battle lines and rode directly up the hill's center, heedless of the lightning that struck all around him. His horse fell, pierced by thorns of living stone, but he pressed on afoot. "Pallando!" he cried as he reached the summit. "Face me, if you dare!" The wizard turned, and for a moment, something like amusement flickered in his terrible eyes. "You? A mere captain of horse lords? What can you hope to accomplish?" But as Eothein began to speak the words of unmaking, Pallando's expression changed to one of shock and growing fear. The words of unmaking were fire upon Eothein's tongue, each syllable burning like molten metal. As he spoke, the silver crown began to crack, its 7 stars flickering and dying one by one. Pallando shrieked and raised his staff, but the weapon crumbled to ash in his hand. "You fool!" the wizard cried. "Do you know what you do? The crown is not merely a tool of power. It is woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth's growth. Destroy it, and you doom all living things to slow decay." But Eothein continued speaking, even as his life force was consumed by the ancient words. Around them, reality itself seemed to bend and twist, as the crown's destruction sent ripples through the foundations of the world. It was then that the truth was revealed, the great twist that none had foreseen. Pallando spoke truly about the crown's nature, but he lied about his purpose. He had not sought to dominate Middle-earth, but to preserve it. In the distant east, he had discovered signs of a greater corruption, a slow poison left behind by Morgoth himself, spreading through the roots of all growing things. The silver crown was the only thing that could cleanse this taint, but to do so, it required a wielder willing to sacrifice themselves, to become one with the power and guide it from within. Pallando's harsh methods, his apparent hunger for dominion, had been a desperate attempt to gather enough strength to perform this ultimate sacrifice. "The corruption comes from Utumno's ruins," he gasped as the crown's destruction continued. "If the crown is destroyed, nothing can stop it. In 100 years, perhaps 200, all growing things will sicken and die." But it was too late. The words of unmaking could not be stopped once begun. As the last star went dark, Pallando aged centuries in moment, his borrowed youth failing as his true appearance was revealed, not a figure of terrible beauty, but an ancient wanderer, bent with sorrow and the weight of terrible knowledge. The crown shattered with a sound like the breaking of the world, and Pallando fell to dust. But in that moment of destruction, something unexpected happened. Eothein, who should have died speaking the words, found himself still standing. The crown's destruction had indeed doomed Middle-earth to slow decay, but it had also freed the wizard's accumulated power, and in his final moment, Pallando had chosen to gift it to the one who had shown such courage. "The burden passes to you now," Pallando's voice whispered on the wind, "not as wielder of the crown, but as guardian against the corruption. You have perhaps 1,000 years before the blight spreads beyond stopping. Use them wisely." And so Eothein, simple captain of the Rohirrim, became the last guardian of Middle-earth's growing things. His life extended beyond mortal span, his burden heavier than any crown. The storm passed, the immediate danger ended, but the true test, the long, slow fight against Morgoth's final curse, had only just begun. In Edoras, King Elfwine would sing of the victory at Weathertop, but he would also remember the price. And in the margins of his annals, he wrote, "Some victories are but the beginning of longer war, and the greatest heroes are those who take up burdens that others cannot see." Thus ended the storm over the Silver Plain, though its echoes would ring through Middle-earth until the world's ending. Epilogue: The Long Watch. the passing of years. In the years that followed the breaking of the Silver Crown, Middle-earth knew a strange peace. Not the deep tranquility that had blessed the elder days, but the quiet of a patient waiting. The immediate storm had passed, the visible darkness lifted, yet those with wisdom in their hearts sensed the deeper currents that now moved beneath the surface of the world. King Elfwine ruled long and well from the Golden Hall, but often he would stand upon the high steps of Meduseld and gaze northward toward the lonely places where Eothen kept his vigil. The king aged as mortal men do, his golden hair turning silver, his strong hands growing gnarled with the passing of seasons. Yet, whenever riders brought word from the northern marches, tales of blighted crops restored overnight, of sick cattle mysteriously healed, of forests that should have withered instead, bursting into unseasonable bloom, Elfwine would nod and whisper a prayer of gratitude to his lost captain. He walks still. The king would tell his counselors when they spoke of the empty place at the round table where Eothen once sat. Though we see him not, though he comes no more to our halls, he walks the hidden paths that we cannot follow, and Middle-earth endures because of his sacrifice. The Rohirrim raised no monument to their vanished hero, for Eothen himself had forbidden it in the last letter he sent to Edoras. A message written in a hand that trembled with more than mortal weariness. "Remember me not in stone," he had written, "for stone endures while my watch requires that I be as the wind, ever moving, never resting, touching all things but belonging to none. Let my name fade from the songs of men, that I might better serve the needs of all living things." Yet though his name was not spoken in the halls of kings, the common folk remembered him in their own way. Farmers would leave bowls of milk and fresh bread by their gates on nights when the moon was dark, whispering for the walking guardian. Shepherds taught their sons to watch for a lone figure on distant hilltops, and if they saw him, to raise their staffs in silent salute. The Ents of Fangorn, those ancient watchers who understood the deep patience required of guardians, would sometimes speak his name in their slow tongue. Eothane the steadfast, Eothane the unchanging, Eothane who tends the roots that others cannot see. Nori, the wisdom of Elladan. Elrondion lingered in Middle-earth longer than he had planned, drawn by a scholar's curiosity and a warrior's concern for the battle that he alone among mortals truly understood. In the libraries of Minas Tirith, he compiled the scattered lore of Morgoth's ancient works, tracing the patterns of corruption that had been set in motion in the music's earliest discord. The elf lord discovered that Pallando had spoken truly. The poison that seeped through Middle-earth's foundation was subtle but inexorable, a slow entropy that would, if left unchecked, drain the life from all growing thing. Yet Eothen's sacrifice had bought them time, perhaps centuries, to find a more permanent solution. Working with the wisest of men, Elladan established a secret order, the Tenders of the Deep Root, they called themselves, whose members were sworn to study the Blight and aid their unseen guardian however they could. They learned to read the signs of the corruption's spread, the way certain streams ran bitter in the spring, how some flowers bloomed in colors that had no name, the strange behavior of migrating birds that flew in patterns that defied natural law. These learned men and women scattered across Middle-earth, taking up residence in remote towers and hidden valleys, always watching, always ready to send word when the corruption pressed too hard against Eothane's vigilance. They developed rituals and remedies, not magical in the way of the elder days, but precise applications of herbal lore and natural philosophy that could, for a time, hold back the spreading taint. We are like physicians tending a patient whose sickness runs deeper than our art can reach. Elladan would tell new initiates, we cannot cure the disease, but we can ease its symptoms and buy our true healer the strength he needs to continue his work. The Elf Lord himself took up residence in a tower built upon the ruins of Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, where he could look far across the lands and coordinate the work of the scattered tender. From this vantage point, he occasionally glimpsed their guardian, a distant figure moving with purpose across landscapes that seemed to shimmer with hidden life, leaving behind him a wake of renewed vigor in the growing world. The changing of Middle-earth. As the Fourth Age deepened and the dominion of men spread ever wider, the nature of Middle-earth itself began to change. The great forests dwindled as cities grew, the ancient ways were forgotten as new roads carved straight paths across the countryside, and the mysterious places where magic had once dwelt were mapped and measured by the practical minds of engineers and merchants. Yet, wherever Eothen walked, something of the older world persisted. Villages that lay along his hidden paths retained their ancient customs longer than their neighbors. Groves that should have fallen to the woodsman's axe were preserved by inexplicable accidents. Sudden storms that drove away the cutters, unexpected discoveries of rare herbs that made the land too valuable to clear, or simply a persistent feeling among the local folk that some places should remain untouched. The Guardian himself became something between myth and legend. Travelers on lonely roads would sometimes speak of meeting a weathered man in a plain gray cloak who would share their fire for a night and speak knowledgeably of distant places and long-ago time. He would ask searching questions about the health of their crops, the behavior of their livestock, the quality of their well water, and always he would listen more than he spoke. These encounters followed a pattern that the tenders learned to recognize. The mysterious traveler would appear wherever the corruption pressed hardest against the world's defenses, staying just long enough to assess the threat and apply whatever remedy lay within his power. Sometimes this meant planting seed that would grow into specific herbs needed to cleanse contaminated soil. Sometimes it meant redirecting streams to wash away accumulated poison. And sometimes it meant darker work, the swift, silent elimination of creatures that had been too deeply touched by the blight to be saved. Those who encountered him in these later years said that Eothane bore the weight of centuries in his eyes, though his step remained firm and his purpose clear. He had learned to subsist on little sleep and less food, sustained by the power that Pallando had bequeathed to him, but always at the cost of growing isolation from the world he protected. "I am become like the Ents in their fashion," he once told a tender who had sought him out in the depths of Fangorn. "Long-lived and slow to change, bound to growing things but separate from the quick joys of those who live and die in their proper season. Yet this is not a burden to be pitied. It is a gift to be treasured. For I alone among mortals am privileged to see the deep patterns that connect all living things, and to serve as the thread that weaves them into a greater tapestry. The price of guardianship. Yet immortality, even when freely chosen in service of a noble cause, carries its own sorrow. Eothine watched the world change around him with the mixed emotions of one who loves deeply but cannot fully belong. He witnessed the deaths of friends and the passing of entire generations, saw familiar landscapes transformed beyond recognition, observed the slow drift of languages and custom that gradually made him a stranger in the lands he protected. King Elfwine died in his bed, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, whispering with his last breath a message for the Guardian who walked the hidden paths. Tell him that he is not forgotten, and that the debt of the Rohirrim shall never be repaid. His son, Folkwyne, ruled after him, and then Folkwyne's son, and so the generations passed, while Eothen remained unchanging in his vigil. The hardest moments came when the corruption struck directly at those he had come to care for in his wanderings. A village girl who had shared her bread with a mysterious traveler would fall ill with a wasting sickness that no herb could cure. A young shepherd who had guided the Guardian to a place where the blight ran strong would age and die before his time, his life force drained by proximity to the ancient poison. A family of farmers who had opened their home to him would see their crops fail despite his best efforts. Forced to abandon land their ancestors had worked for generations. In these dark hours, Eothen would stand alone on high hills under the star-scattered sky and speak aloud the names of those he had failed to save. A litany of loss that grew longer with each passing year. Yet he never wavered in his purpose, for he understood that for every life the corruption claimed. Despite his efforts, 100 others flourished in ignorance of the fate he had turned aside. "I am the stone that breaks the current," he would murmur to himself in those moments of deepest sorrow. "The water flows around me and continues on its way, never knowing that its path has been changed. This is the nature of my service, to be present but unseen, effective but unrewarded, faithful though forgotten." The deep root. As centuries passed, Eothen's understanding of his enemy deepened. The corruption was not a simple poison that could be drawn out or burned away, but rather a fundamental discord woven into the very foundations of Middle-earth during the music of creation. Morgoth's rebellion had introduced notes of malice and entropy into the great song, and though the Dark Lord himself had been overthrown, his dissonance continued to resonate through the ages. The corruption manifested differently in different ages and places, adapting to whatever forms of life it encountered. In the elder days, it had appeared as great monsters and obvious evils that could be fought with sword and flame. In later times, it became more subtle, a blight that worked through natural processes, a sickness that resembled ordinary disease, a decay that could be mistaken for the normal passage of time. "It learns," Eothane reported to Elladan during one of their rare meetings, held in a hidden chamber beneath the roots of an ancient oak in Fangorn. "The corruption adapts its methods to avoid detection, evolving new forms of infection as I develop counters to the old one. We are engaged not in a single battle, but in a war of eternal vigilance, each victory temporary and each defeat potentially catastrophic." The Elf Lord nodded grimly, his own immortal features showing the weight of long study and growing concern. "My research confirms your observation. The corruption is not diminishing despite our efforts. It is merely changing tactics. We are buying time, but we are not winning." Yet Eothen had not spent centuries in his vigil without learning deeper truths about the nature of his enemy. Through careful observation and bitter experience, he had come to understand that the corruption fed on despair and grew stronger in the presence of hatred or hopelessness. Where love flourished and life was celebrated, it found less purchase. Where communities worked together in harmony with the natural world, its influence waned. "The ultimate weapon against Morgoth's discord," he told the assembled tenders at a secret conclave, "is not magical power or ancient lore, but the simple choice to nurture rather than destroy, to build rather than tear down, to hope rather than despair. Every act of kindness weakens the corruption. Every moment of joy diminishes its whole. Every birth of a healthy child is a victory in the war for Middle-earth's soul." The prophecy fulfilled. In the final years of the Fourth Age, when the kingdoms of men had grown mighty and the memory of magic had faded to folklore, a child was born in the hills of Rohan who would change the course of the eternal war. Her name was Eowyn the Younger, named for the great shield maiden of old, and from her earliest days she showed an unusual affinity for growing things. Where other children her age played with dolls or wooden swords, young Eowyn would sit for hours in her family's garden, her small hands pressed against the earth, humming wordless songs that made the flowers bloom more brightly and the vegetables grow larger and sweeter than any her neighbors could produce. Birds would perch on her shoulders without fear, and sick animals would seek her out as if drawn by some instinct deeper than thought. The village wise woman, herself one of the scattered tenders, though the child's family never knew it, watched the girl's development with growing excitement and careful hope. Here, perhaps, was the one foretold in the most ancient of Palando's writings, the heir of the song, who would be born when Middle-earth's need was greatest, and who would have the power to heal what had been broken in the music of creation itself. When Eowyn reached her 16th year, she began to dream of a gray-cloaked wanderer who walked endless paths through landscape that shifted and changed like music made visible. In these dreams, the wanderer would turn and look at her with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries and the sorrow of unbearable burdens, and she would wake with tears on her cheeks, and a song in her heart that she could never quite remember. It was on the night of the autumn equinox that the dreams finally led her from her village, following paths that seemed to open before her feet, as if the very earth were guiding her steps. She walked through the night and into the dawn, her family's frantic searches unable to trace her passage, for she moved now in the hidden ways that only the Guardian. At sunrise, she found herself standing in a clearing that existed in no map of Middle-earth, a place where the trees grew in perfect spiral and the grass sang with harmonies that resonated in the depths of her bone. And there, seated on a fallen log with his weathered hands folded in his lap, was the wanderer from her dream. "You have come at last," Eothen said simply, and his voice carried both infinite weariness and dawning hope. "I had begun to fear that the prophecy was false, that I would carry this burden until the breaking of the world." "I don't understand," Eowyn whispered, though even as she spoke, knowledge was blooming in her mind, like flowers opening to the sun. She could see the patterns now, the deep roots that connected all living things, the dark threads of corruption that sought to sever those connections, and the tremendous effort required to keep them whole. "You are the heir of the song," Eothen replied, rising to his feet with movements that spoke of centuries of careful preservation. "Born with the power to heal what Morgoth broke, to restore the harmony that was lost in the music's first discord. I have held the corruption at bay for 1,000 years, but I cannot cure it. That task falls to you." The passing of the torch. The teaching took place over the course of 7 years, though to the outside world, both teacher and student simply vanished from the knowledge of mortal men. They walked the secret paths together, Eothen sharing the hard-won wisdom of his millennial vigil, while Eowyn learned to shape her innate power according to need and circumstance. She discovered that her gift worked not through domination or force, but through understanding and harmony. Where the corruption sought to isolate and divide, she could weave new connections. Where it introduced discord, she could restore the proper relationships between growing things. Where it brought decay and death, she could kindle new life from the ashes of the old. Yet the learning was not without its cost. To fully comprehend the scope of the corruption, Eowyn had to experience its touch directly, allowing small portions of the blight to enter her own spirit, so that she could understand its nature from within. Each such encounter left her weakened and sorrowful, marking her with knowledge that no mortal was meant to bear. "Now you begin to understand the price of guardianship," Eothen told her as she recovered from a particularly difficult lesson. "To heal the world, you must first allow yourself to be wounded by its pain. To restore what is broken, you must carry within yourself the memory of how it was broken. This is why the task could not be entrusted to one who had not chosen it freely. No power, however great, can compel another to bear such a burden." But Eowyn's youth and native strength served her well, and gradually she learned not only to resist the corruption, but to transform it, turning its own energy back upon itself in a process that was part healing, part exorcism, and part redemption. Under her touch, blighted lands did not merely return to health. They became more fertile and vibrant than they had ever been before. "You do what I could not," Eothen observed with wonder as he watched her work. "I could only hold the corruption at bay, maintaining an endless stalemate. But you change its very nature, turning darkness into light, discord into harmony. In you, the music finds its voice again." Djurdstud, the song restored. The final confrontation came not as a battle, but as a choice. Deep beneath the mountains of shadow, in chambers that had been sealed since the breaking of Thangorodrim, lay the source of the corruption. A great crystalline formation that pulsed with malevolent energy. The physical manifestation of Morgoth's discord given form and substance in the depths of the earth. Standing before this nexus of ancient evil, Eowyn faced the ultimate test of her power and resolve. She could destroy the crystal, ending the corruption's influence forever, but at the cost of her own life and the lives of all who had been touched by its poison, including Eothen himself, whose extended existence was sustained by the same forces he had spent centuries fighting. Or she could attempt something far more dangerous, not to destroy the discord, but to heal it, to weave it back into the greater music as a necessary counterpoint to creation's song. Such an act would require her to merge her own spirit with the corruption, becoming one with it in order to guide its transformation from within. "If I succeed," she told Eothen, as they stood in the crystal's pulsing light, "the corruption will be cleansed not just from Middle-earth, but from the music itself. Creation will be made whole again, and the discord that Morgoth introduced will become instead a new kind of harmony, deeper and more complex than what came before." "And if you fail?" Eothane asked, though he already knew the answer. "If I fail, the corruption will claim me completely, and through me it will gain access to the very heart of the song. Middle-earth will die, and the music will be silenced forever." Eothen was quiet for a long moment, studying the face of the young woman who had become both his student and his successor. In her features, he could see echoes of all the heroes who had ever served the cause of light. The nobility of Gil-galad, the determination of Elendil, the wisdom of Gandalf, and the simple courage of countless others who had given their lives so that others might live. "The choice is yours to make," he said finally. "I have carried this burden as long as I can, and I trust your judgment more than my own. Whatever you decide, know that you have already succeeded beyond my wildest hopes, and that serving as your teacher has been the greatest honor of my long life." Eowyn smiled then, and in that smile was all the joy and sorrow of the world made manifest. "Then let us restore the song, Master. Let us heal what has been broken and make it whole again." The new dawn. What followed transcended the power of words to describe. Eowyn reached out with her spirit and embraced the corruption, drawing it into herself and welcoming it as a part of creation's greater design. The crystal shattered, its malevolent energy transformed in an instant from poison to medicine, from discord to harmony, from ending to beginning. The transformation rippled outward from that deep chamber, spreading across Middle-earth in waves of renewed life and vitality. Barren lands burst into bloom, sick animals rose to their feet in perfect health, and poisoned streams ran clear and sweet. But more than that, the very nature of growth and decay was altered, so that death became not an ending but a transformation, so that every ending carried within it the seed of a new beginning. Eothen felt the change most acutely of all, for the power that had sustained his endless vigil was suddenly transformed into something entirely different. The weight of centuries lifted from his shoulders, and he found himself aging rapidly as his body reclaimed its natural mortal span. Yet he felt no fear or regret, only a deep satisfaction at a task finally completed and a burden finally laid down. "It is finished," he whispered as he sank to his knees beside the shattered remains of the crystal. "The watch is ended, and Middle-earth is free." But Eowyn, transformed by her union with the corruption but somehow still recognizably herself, knelt beside him and took his weathered hands in hers. "Not ended, Master. Changed. The corruption is healed, but the world still needs its guardian. Will you not walk with me a while longer and teach me how to tend the new harmony we have created?" And so the last guardian of the old age became the first teacher of the new, helping to establish a tradition of watchers who would ensure that the healed music continued to play in perfect harmony through all the ages yet to come. Epilogues end, the eternal song. In the years that followed, bards would sing of the storm over the Silver Plain and the heroes who weathered it. But they would speak of it as the ending of one age and the beginning of another. The age of men gave way to the age of harmony, when the long discord that had echoed through Middle-earth since the music's first notes was finally resolved into something greater and more beautiful than had ever existed before. Eothen lived another score of years in mortal time, serving as Eowyn's counselor and friend as she established the new order of Guardian. When death finally claimed him, it came not as an ending, but as a transformation, his spirit joining the great song itself, his voice adding its note to the eternal melody that guides the growth of all living things. On the night of his passing, every flower in Middle-earth bloomed at once, regardless of season, and every bird sang a song of such beauty that those who heard it wept without knowing why. And in the hidden places where the new guardians kept their watch, they felt the presence of their founder and teacher, not as a ghost or spirit, but as a living part of the harmony they serve. Eowyn continued her work for many years, training others in the arts of tending and healing, until she too passed beyond the circles of the world. But by then, the traditions were established, the knowledge preserved, and the song secure in its new harmony. And so, Middle-earth entered its final age, not an age of ending, but of eternal becoming, where every death gave birth to new life, where every sorrow carried within it the seed of joy, and where the music played on in perfect harmony, world without end. In the halls of memory, where all songs eventually find their home, the tale of Eothen, son of Erkenbrand, is remembered not as a tragedy of sacrifice, but as a triumph of love. The love that moves the sun and stars, that calls life from barren ground, and that transforms even the deepest discord into the most beautiful harmony of all. Thus ends the tale of the storm over the Silver Plain, and thus begins the song that has no ending.